At the moment, I'm enjoying. I think there is more to come. I want to win a race.
That was Fernando Alonso celebrating his 6th podium of the season in Canada, just 4 races ago. It felt like his 10-year wait for his 33rd Formula 1 victory was nearing an end, and that the Aston Martin car was clearly the second fastest on the grid, overcoming Ferrari and Mercedes consistently. Skip forward 4 Grand Prix, however, and now the story couldn't be more different. Mike Crack described it as a reality check for the team, but what's actually happened to Aston Martin? Well, I don't think anything has happened. Let me explain. It's been a weird time for Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso since Canada, as they've slowly seen themselves falling backwards down the order, from 2nd to 5th to 7th to 9th to 5th again. They haven't completely dropped off a cliff, but they almost seem miles away from winning a Grand Prix, which was not the case that long ago. What we've been hearing from the team, more specifically Fernando Alonso, is that the change in tyre compound from the British Grand Prix at Silverstone has contributed to Aston Martin's recent turn in form, meaning that they've dropped behind Mercedes and could even drop behind Ferrari in the constructors' standings. Fernando has even argued that in sport you don't change the balls in the middle of a tennis tournament, and this is what happens when we change tyres here. You can feel the car a little bit different with the tyres. However, before Fernando Alonso fans get their pitchforks out and march themselves over to the Pirelli headquarters, there was good reason to change the tyres. The construction of these tyres had to adapt to the rapid increase in downforce that these 2023 Formula 1 cars seem to be able to generate compared to last year's cars. As well as this, Fernando Alonso's views on the new tyres don't quite line up as far as Aston Martin's team is concerned. Aston Martin's performance director, Tom McCullough, said, "Thus far, the changes have been quite small. We did some measurements of the tyres where we could compare them back to back in Barcelona, like lots of teams did, so no big changes at this stage." That means that the changes the team has had to make to accommodate these new tyres has actually been minimal. And as much as I would love to side with Fernando Alonso on this and go full Formula 1 Pirelli conspiracy theory, even Mike Crack said, I would not want to blame it on the tyres because that would be too easy. So if not the tyres, then what? I think there's been a bit more of a fundamental change that has happened, which is costing Aston Martin in particular, and it's not a change that they've made, but instead is everyone else getting better whilst Aston Martin have stood still. Let's look at qualifying for the first 5 races of the season and the gap between Pole and Fernando Alonso. Generally speaking, he's around 5 to 7 tenths off the top spot. And if we take the last 4 races, the qualifying gaps again, he's around about 5 to 7 tenths off the top spot. So in terms of 1 lap pace in qualifying, the Aston Martin is pretty much where it was before. However, at the start of the season, that gap between Alonso and pole position was filled with Perez, maybe one of the Ferraris, maybe occasionally a Mercedes car. Now that gap is filled with both Ferraris, both Mercedes, both McLarens, an Alpine, even a Williams or an Alfa Romeo. Everyone else has closed the gap to the top and made the 2nd or 3rd best car slot an incredibly competitive fight. For instance, Aston Martin introduced its last major upgrade package in Canada, and I don't think it's a coincidence that that's also the last time we saw Fernando Alonso step onto the podium. Since then, McLaren has taken a huge step forward in terms of its upgrades, and we've seen a lot of developments being introduced by Mercedes and Ferrari as well. Aston Martin's changes across Austria, Britain, Hungary, and Belgium have all been circuit specific, where other teams have developed their package further. Unfortunately for the team in green, Formula 1 is possibly the most fast-moving sport in terms of development. Teams make changes constantly, and we see upgrade packages all the time, especially during this European stint where a combination of geography, data, and development time means that this part of the year in particular is positioned at the perfect point in the season to allow teams a chance to change their cars dramatically. I mean, even Red Bull chief engineer Paul Monahan, as dominant as their car has been, addressed the improvements of the other teams, saying, "No one is standing still. Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Alpine, Alfa Romeo, they're all allowed to develop the same as we are," which once again just highlights that need to move forward constantly in Formula 1, even when the car looks completely untouchable. I think the thing for Aston Martin is jumping to the top of the chasing pack at the start of the season was a surprise to us, but I think it surprised them as well. They're still very early in this life of a Formula 1 team under the Aston Martin name, with new facilities and loads of staff members coming in, so they've never been in a situation before where they're actually one of the teams setting the standard for the rest of the field. I used to joke about the fact that they always seem to get around 5 races into the season and then give up, saying next year will be our year, when we have the factory, when we have this and that, it will be our time. And it feels like their time kind of crept up on them and they weren't ready for the relentless upgrades that you need to keep yourself there ahead of the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari that have been working at the highest level of this sport for years. They showed last year that they can develop a midfield car really well and overcome the likes of AlphaTauri, Haas and Alfa Romeo in terms of development, but it's a different game altogether at the top of the standings. Then there's the obvious comparison with McLaren, who have completely turned around their fortunes this season, from running around at the back to being right at the sharp end of the grid, with both Norris and Piastri battling with the Red Bulls in recent weeks. But I think there's a little bit of recency bias on this, because if you look at the jump Aston Martin made at the start of the year, it's almost very similar to the jump McLaren have made now, and we need to see if McLaren can keep it up or if they'll do as Aston Martin have done and slowly be put back in their place by the more traditional top 3. There is one massive positive for Aston Martin in all of this though, and it's that they're not hiding away from the fact that they need to improve. Mike Crack has even said, this is a reality check for us. We've slipped back. We have to be honest about it. We need to work hard to give our drivers a better car because they maximised what we could do. The cars were in pace order on a track where we thought we would be more competitive, and we're not. We realise that we're not quick enough. Don't get me wrong, the team still has plenty of time left this season, with 10 races to come after the summer break and a few upgrades that they've got in the works as well that may be able to get them back towards the top end of the field, especially as we end the year with tracks more akin to Bahrain and Miami, where the Aston Martin package was definitely at its best. And I think it's really important to note that the drop in overall performance over the last few races doesn't mean that Aston Martin is suddenly uncompetitive and that their season has been a massive flop. In fact, I think it's the opposite. They found performance at the start of the year where others didn't and managed to break into that top 3, something that Alpine and McLaren have said they'll be able to achieve and failed to do for years now. As Mike Crack said, everything went really positive for many months now, and it's a test for us all to see how we handle that situation. It's a new challenge for the team and something that all teams have to go through to reach that top step. Fernando knows this too, saying it's up to us to understand a little bit better what the car is doing now compared to the beginning of the season, how many upgrades we brought compared to our competitors. We just need to do our job. And I like the fact that the team seem optimistic that they can overcome this slump as they've kind of stood still and everyone else has jumped forward. And I think it's important that the team realise they're still building for the future here. It's still very early days, and that they won't be the most exciting team on the grid every single race like they were at the start of the year. But instead, they could look at this as something which, if they can overcome it, it sets incredible foundations to maybe challenge right at the top for championships in the future. I'd love to know what you think Aston Martin can achieve with the rest of the season in the comments down below. And if you've actually enjoyed this video, I did another video talking about their second driver problem in Lance Stroll, which I think you'll absolutely love too. So click that link and I'll see you over there.